Now, over the last couple meetings, we've kind of jumped about in terms of how the select board was going to define our charge. They've tweaked it. I'm gonna let you speak about that, Sue.
Yes, we sort of got scattered off into multiple different directions, so this is what we originally intended in sort of a broader term. Does everybody have a copy?
No, I read it, but I don't have one.
You didn't.
Do you have one there?
I can make one very quickly.
Or mine?
Well, yeah, because we need to.
I'll make two while you're making one.
Well, while you're doing it, shall I read this?
Yeah.
Weather events, deteriorating road conditions, and the rising costs of quality education have escalated demands on the town budget. There is little reason to expect these budget pressures to ease under the current fiscal and tax structure in the state of New Hampshire. This committee is charged by the select board to begin exploring revenue side trade-offs relating to Lyme's budget challenges. Specifically, this committee is charged to 1, evaluate the current real estate tax structure of Lyme. 2, describe the trajectory of taxes. 3, describe the types of business or residential development that might positively affect the tax base. 4, describe the trade-offs of additional development. 5, assess community opinion regarding possible additional development. Then it says membership. The Community Development Committee shall consist of not less than 7 or more than 9 members appointed by the Select Board. It shall include 1 Select Board member as an ex officio member. Duties and responsibilities. The committee shall elect its own chair and establish its own organization per the Town of Lyme Committee Handbook. Meet monthly or as needed. Identify businesses that would fit into the Lyme community. Identify restrictions or impediments to those businesses relocating to Lyme. Recommend measures to enable appropriate businesses for Lyme. Conduct public meetings / hearings as appropriate. And finally, submit a final report with recommendations to the Select Board by January 31st, 2019.
Something happened since then.
That's the one I read.
6:40, that's 6:40 tonight. I got another version.
That was a pretty good one.
Oh,
That was,
it's fun.
that was yours. Now, let me see.
Ah,
Sue, if I may, I was the one that sent it, so just for the LCDC folks, what Sue just read was a draft, and tomorrow we're supposed to work through that draft, my understanding is.
right.
And we can't really respond to it until it gets out draft form into the final format.
Yeah, this is interesting.
Well, I have a copy of it.
Oh, all right.
That's all right.
Print you the revised version.
Does it have to be voted on? What I thought it would be appropriate for this group to do this evening was to just say, yeah, we accept the amended responsibility.
It's one to be raised.
Yep.
You know.
Let's review it. No, we got 2 of them there.
Me too.
There's 2 pages to each one. One's a signature page. Okay.
So this is to be discussed tomorrow, I take it?
Right, the committee can review it.
Well, look, I see the fifth item is assess community opinion regarding possible additional development has been stricken.
Is there a reason for that?
We can talk that tomorrow.
What was the answer?
And also the last
Doesn't want to talk
one,
about it tonight.
that conduct public meetings, hearings as appropriate has been stricken. I think let's jump ahead and let's read, the fourth item on the agenda tonight was to review the planning board letter that I just recently saw. And first I need to apologize because I jump back between Ohio and New Hampshire every 2 to 3 weeks, so sometimes I don't see my mail at the post office for a long period of time.
So if I may,
Sure.
what I was told by David Robbins was that that letter was sent on, of all days, Valentine's Day, I guess because of all the love. So, did you receive the letter?
I finally got it from Sue.
How did Sue get it?
From David.
So you never got the letter?
I think that we did, we were going out of town, we went down,
No,
we were
we
driving
never-
back to Ohio, which is a 12-hour drive.
Okay,
We
so
never-
We
it
went
was-
down to the
it was-
post
it was
office, my
sent-
wife said, there's something from the
it was
planning
sent
board.
it was
She
sent
threw
two
it in a
months-
suitcase and I
Okay.
have.
It was
I
sent
did
2
see
months
it.
ago.
Okay. So, we received the letter and, do you have a copy of it? I asked you to bring that.
I do have a copy. Stay
I think I'd like to read it. We're glad we could all finally sit together at the same table and discuss Lyme's future. It was a productive discussion with areas of agreement and disagreement. We all agree about the potential value of exploring business development options in Lyme and finding ways to make Lyme more attractive to businesses. We agree that Lyme's lack of sewer and other services when compared to towns to the south make it harder to draw businesses here. Internet and cell service improvements are priorities. Extending advanced transit to Lyme would be a benefit. Developing a web presence that promotes all that Lyme has to offer, including its many existing but unused commercial assets, is a good idea. Please read RSI 674-1-4. It's the planning board's responsibility to oversee the master plan and visioning process by raising funds for its own visioning process without consulting with or even notifying the board. The LCDC has moved to preempt the board's legal role. To be absolutely clear, as authorized by law, the planning board will continue in its rightful role of overseeing the master plan and visioning process. Understanding that there will be differing opinions, any final changes to the master plan will be done with input from the townspeople and will involve a variety of citizens from various committees, organizations, and perspectives to help guide the process. For the present, the board will finish the housing chapter and a build-out analysis associated with the senior housing article proposal. Your charge to broaden the tax base cannot be achieved simply by rezoning more land for commercial development. The arrival of these new businesses will create service demands and put more pressure on our housing market, and therefore it is unclear whether any such development would actually result in a net benefit to our tax burden. What is clear is that the character of our community would be changed. Our master plan and zoning ordinance embody principles of development that are meant to reinforce small towns in New England. They both work to direct development to our villages and to minimize sprawl. Lyme is distinctive and should remain so. We can increase our tax base by focusing developments to areas already zoned to receive that development. Immediately, the emphasis should be on achieving our existing economic potential as we plan for the future areas of growth. It was helpful for the board to hear your opinions and concerns. As an advocate and facilitator for business and development interest in Lyme, the LCDC can serve an important role that we appreciate. I take issue that we are an advocate and facilitator for business and development interests in Lyme. That's simply not true. At this point, we've been asked to, going back to the charge that I read, to evaluate the current real estate tax structure of Lyme. That we've done.
You mean the current charge?
Please. to evaluate the current real estate tax structure of Lyme, and to describe the trajectory of taxes. That we have done, and we've put out an interim report. So what we need to do is to have a conversation with the townspeople, and to go to a public meeting, visiting type of process. It is perfectly true that the RSA says that your group, the planning board, can conduct visioning, and I think they're supposed to do that every 5 to 10 years, if memory serves, to revisit it and re-examine your master plan. It does not say you have exclusive control over that, and certainly I'm a New Hampshire lawyer, and my informal opinion would be that the select board certainly has authority to get her done any way that they want to. I am, rather than have a discussion at this point, I would like to hear from my committee members on their thinking.
Well, part of this is the fact that our charge keeps getting moved around a little bit. And so that's somewhat disconcerting, because, you know, we had a charge, and now we got another one that you guys are gonna discuss apparently, that takes out the assess community opinion and conduct public meetings part of our charge. So to me,
There's no reason for us to exist.
right, exactly. So, I mean, either we're gonna exist as a committee or not. And if we're gonna exist as a committee, we have every right, I believe.
Who took that out?
To do visioning. What's that?
Who took that out?
You'd have to talk to Kevin, but.
So, we're not engaging with it.
But it seems to me that if we're gonna exist as a committee, that we have the right to go out and talk to the community about how we think about change.
You can't do anything without that, and so there's no purpose in this meeting.
Well, I'm not sure that I agree with that. I mean, if you're, you know, it seemed to me we've worked pretty hard for 9 months with the support of the select board, knowing full well the types of things we were doing, receiving our interim report. And unless you're telling me that you've already, as a select board, discussed the revisions that were just put in front of you, then it seems to me, didn't you vote on this charge? That was my understanding, the one that I read at your last meeting.
We had discussed it, I'm not sure that we actually voted.
Do you remember?
No,
Well, the old charge is still on the table, so until it's been modified. So,
Can I just ask how many charges have you had? Because it seemed to
Doesn't
change
matter.
quite
Listen,
frequently.
we're at the committee meeting, okay?
Okay.
Let's,
so you're gonna have to go back to Rusty and Kevin, and if you wanna you can do whatever you wanna do.
yeah,
I suspect I know how Rusty feels about these matters, I don't know. But he has been supportive to date. So while we're here, that's my view, is that we're gonna go forward with the vision plan. We're gonna hire a consultant. We're gonna encourage everybody in this room to come to every meeting and tell us what you think and help us organize the thing. One of the matters that I wanted to raise was we were talking about trying to put a steering committee together, sort of outside of this particular group. I think we had 10 or 11 people who were expressed an interest in participating in that. They were almost all but one were men. I thought that was not representative of the community, that we needed to have balance. So I asked Martha Tecca, who I know from choir, to help me reach out to other ladies in the community who are active in the community, and she got a list together. I haven't communicated with most of them directly yet, pending resolution of some of these things, but I think what we want to do is to not use that steering committee, but use this committee itself to organize and make arrangements for a visioning process. There's just, you can't have 20 people and make that work.
And plus, I've never really understood the need for a steering committee. Aren't we the folks that are supposed to be steering? I mean, we don't need another group of folks outside the committee to steer us.
I would entertain a motion to that effect.
Okay. I think we should delete the steering committee from, that we voted on a month ago or so, and just encourage those folks to attend as many meetings as they can to bring their friends.
And as part of your motion that the LCDC would organize and
Yes, the
make the
LCDC will
arrangements.
be the main organizer of the process.
Do we have a second?
Second.
In favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Still
Now-
thinking?
I don't know. I don't know, I'd like to. I think that I don't know how apropos it is, but I think that the steering committee that we saw, there was a lot of lack of guidance and understanding what was expected, how they go about it. I think that the people who came probably wanted to help. So I would like to somehow, if we're going, I kind of think that the steering committee that we saw, rather than tossing them in the brook, should be set aside, so that when we get to the point that we can use their help, we'll get back to them with something specific. For example, we may want someone to help us put out a questionnaire if we went to that direction.
That's
We could ask them to give us a list of names of people and so forth. So I'd like to be careful that we don't just dismiss them and.
No, that was not my intention
Well, I
at
know,
all.
but it sounded like that's what we were
It
doing.
was trying to get a, we've been working on this for 9 months, the committee,
I understand that.
and I think have an idea of what needs to be done in terms of bringing about community participation. And you're exactly right that many of the folks that were here the last time, first time I'd seen many of them in this context. And so, anyway, when you started to say that, I was reaching for a note that I had made earlier this evening, is that it would be very helpful if we could help those folks or anybody here tonight to help us design a survey. I think Mike Smith, I was hoping he was gonna be here tonight, had some involvement in that the last time around 10 or 12 years ago. But that may be one of the things that has some
I
utility.
understand that.
Stuart Arnett is here tonight, and I'm gonna ask Stu not to forget, but I'd like you, when you speak, Stu, to address the issue of surveys and what their utility
Sure.
might be. So I guess this is the point. I asked Stuart to come up.
Well, actually, let's.
Sure.
I think we talked about, the role of a steering committee. I think you're right. I think that it is incumbent on the LCDC to set the parameters and then to, as Earl says, find a way for a larger group of people who care about this to be helpful.
Absolutely agree.
And I think that was our original suggestion, and I don't know how it got to be to a steering committee. It was, in my mind, it was always, let's have a group of people that will help us when we're getting ready to go out to the community. And how it got to be from that to a steering committee, I'm not exactly sure. But, I think that those folks have indicated they are interested in it and are going to be helpful for us as we go forward in reaching out to the community, so.
That's one of the things this committee has to do is, once we formulate the plan, is decide where we're going forward and how best to channel all that energy.
So, the motion that you had didn't seem to, as I recall, cover that attitude. I think we're better off saying that this committee appreciates the steering committee, and we will get back to them with more concrete plans as they develop.
With more, as I said the last time, with some direction and some
Yeah, well,
guidance,
direction's
but
better, yeah.
If
what
you,
their charge actually is.
if you don't involve the maximum number of people, it doesn't work. So you've gotta encourage everybody to,
I know, but you're not gonna encourage them if you say we don't need them anymore.
May I say something?
and I'm not saying don't, I'm not saying, didn't say we don't need them, we do need them, we need their input, but in terms of organizing and making some decisions, a group of 20 or more is pretty rough. If you've ever been in other,
I couldn't agree more, but I didn't know I
Would
didn't
you-
understand the motion.
Do we wanna write the words down to the motion?
Yes,
I'm not gonna spend all night trying to make a motion.
Well,
I just don't wanna,
Yeah.
I wanna make sure that we don't start closing ourselves down to an elitist group and
We'll
don't
phrase
need
it
it, you know?
again.
May I say something? I don't think anyone that was here has a problem with not having a moniker or a name. I really don't think that that's an issue. I think the people that are here are very concerned about our situation. And I think the bottom line here is that communication is the most important part of the equation.
absolutely.
And if you guys and the select board and the conservation committee and the planning board, really, you guys have to sit down and start communicating and trying to help each other rather than having this acrimonious bullshit, which is what I think it is. You know, I've been around a long time, and I think you guys, the brain trust here is terrific. You don't need a steering committee. You don't need a steering committee. You've got everything you need, but you have to communicate, and people have to start working with one another.
Sue, do you want to respond to that?
I couldn't agree more.
I'm gonna start writing to you guys. I have all your emails, and I think that that's probably the best I can possibly do, is to just give my ideas on paper. Because talk is really cheap, and you can't get anywhere with a group, with a disparate, what do you call this?
Chaos.
Well, it could be considered that, but it's not really that. It's just that you have a group of people and everyone is going in a different direction. And the issue here is to try and keep our community together. And in order to keep it together, we have to lower the goddamn taxes. They're too much. They're just
Okay.
ridiculous.
Thank you.
Or an agreement.
Due to the unwieldy nature of
No.
this.
How about you made a motion to develop guidelines and clearer direction for the
Sure.
steering committee?
Develop
Well,
guidelines. See,
not
I'm
for
not
the
having a
steering
problem
committee,
with the
for the
steering part of the committee. I'm not sure they are a steering committee, and I think
For the many
for the many folks who.
enthusiastic,
Right.
we didn't really pull it all together.
enthusiastic members of the public.
Yep.
Okay, now, so that this doesn't get tabled, we need a couple of people to sit down and work out this direction and the guidelines.
Yeah, I think that if, as we process through and start making decisions and start making movement, that direction will become clearer.
True?
Your report is terrific, by the way. All the work you put in, it's fantastic.
Thank you. One kind of It's unfortunate that you have this tension between the zoning, the planning board, and, actually, I don't feel any tension, I think that there are two differences of opinion, and that they're honestly held. I mean, that's sort of where I'm coming from. I think the best way to resolve that is to hear what everybody in town feels about these issues, and giving them a forum to present the issues. I read the letter from the planning board. What is clear is that the character of our community would be changed. That's an opinion, I don't think that's a fact, that may or may not be true, and that everything is a question of degree. So, somehow we gotta get people in a room with a neutral orchestra leader to hear what the facts of life are in terms of the types of developments that might be attracted to Lyme, in terms of whether people are tolerant of any of those or not, and they may not be. In that regard, I thought that our town moderator, our new town moderator, which is
Kevin Peterson.
Kevin Peterson, right, did a great job at
He's
the town meeting, and I was hoping that we could reach out to him as somebody who doesn't have an axe to grind to my knowledge, and to help principally run the visioning sessions when we get to them. What's the thought there? Good idea,
I think
Ben?
that's a great idea, I thought he did a good job. So.
Any comment from the folks in the back on that?
He'd make a great moderator, he really would,
Okay.
and I think you need one,
You do, or Bill Waste, I don't know if Kevin, or somebody like that.
somebody
that-
like that.
that is seen as even-handed, and when it comes to working out an agenda for the visioning session, I want to hear, other points of view. I don't want to go in and frame the questions to be seen as trying to get one answer that I'm personally interested in. I'm not, we do need some input from folks. It's just that, at the time, you can't have 20 people on the committee. At this point, I would like one person in particular, Stuart Arnett, to come forward and give us his thoughts. We've met with Stuart once. We met with a number of people. Stuart, I understand you've worked with Ann Duncan Cooley on different projects before. She is our Grafton County Development Director. I think that's her title, something like that. Maybe you could sit here so the folks could see you. And I asked Stuart to basically sort of audition for the consulting job he has represented, and I tried to forward it to people who gave me their emails. The town of Lebanon and other communities around here. And
I'm gonna stand for a minute, if that's okay.
Sure, yeah.
So you can see way in the back there something. And I'll maybe just take 5 minutes and talk about some thoughts. Again, my name's Stu Arnett. Our company, ADG, has been in business about 12 years. We're in Concord, and we work both with planning, land use boards, and community and economic development groups. I'll probably work as hard tonight at talking you out of bringing us on as I will talking you into bringing us on. Because I want to make sure that what you pursue, be it with us or somebody else, could be Ann's group or could be something else, is a solution and not just some more perpetuating the process of not having some shared solutions. Quick background for me, have been was for a long time in the Upper Valley for a long time. My in-laws lived in Corinth, we lived in both Windsor and Claremont. I was the Regional Planning Commission Director in Southern Windsor County before becoming Planning and Development Director for Claremont, and then was the state's Development Director for 2 4-year terms under both Democrat and Republican governors. And as I said, we provide land use services as well as development stuff. And what I would suggest, at the chairman's chagrin maybe, is that instead of focusing on the 5th of the objectives that was given to the committee, which is the conversations that perhaps we or whoever else you might want to use would focus on the first four, which is more of the objectivizing, putting some data together, putting some options together, putting some pictures of what is and isn't fiscally, tax, land use, markets, so that when you do have the conversation you need to have, it is, if we or whoever have done their job, you're looking at the same information on both sides and saying, now, I think I buy the information, now we can get to the question of what do we do about it. But I think if you, my experience is if you start with visioning, and I would, you could call it other things, conversation, and it isn't more defined with agreed upon data, then it's off to the races. All kinds of things can happen. So think of a poll that you pick up the phone, if you pick up the phone during dinner when they call and they say, do you think the nation's headed in the right direction? And, well, okay, yes or no or something. But based on what? The foreign affairs or the economy or the way the Red Sox are doing? What's the, so what I would like to suggest is that we do something what we call an opportunity assessment. Actually be cute, we call it 360 opportunity assessment, meaning we look all the way around. We look at 4 factors for a community. We look at people issues, place issues, money issues, and market issues. And so I think we can come back to you and say, okay, we've looked at the key parameters, the 4 key things that you probably want to consider. We have no dog in the fight here, except we really would like to see the community become better and move forward. That's kind of why we're in business. And then that'll give, I think, if you'll have a chance to look at the data, we'll discuss it with you, we'll talk to the planning board about it, we'll talk to the businesses, we'll look at the assessing records, and then that will give everybody a sense of both what is and then some better sense of what the options are, both from a market sense, from a land use sense, from what the regulations require. And then I think then it makes a lot more sense. You can walk into a variety of different discussion, visioning tools. In addition to the standard, let's all go to the elementary school cafeteria type one, which is fine. There's a lot of really interesting ways of doing now, of getting input from people. There's fairly rudimentary software that allows people to see what things might look like in scenarios. If this happened, this is what this part of town would look like. Do you like it this way or do you like it this way? So some things that get it a little bit out of that just the same 50 people who come to meetings talking to the same 50 people who come to meetings. So there's different ways of doing that that are a little more interesting and perhaps a little bit more consensus building. But I would suggest the first thing is if we can, is working on the, if I could say it again, the opportunity assessment, money market, people, place issues, providing the leadership, anybody, everybody, it's a public document if you're going to use public funds, with that, and then let's have discussions. And of course, we'd be very open to discussions during that process. And don't, if someone says, don't forget this or do for, we're open to that, but get everybody on a launch site that begins to define some of the parameters that people want to talk about so they can move forward. So
If I can interrupt you
I'll
on
talk
one.
myself out of this, but you.
No, actually, what we wanted to do, or my personal concept, having done this once before with another town, is to go into the meeting and you're going to figure out what people want, but the first part of the meeting is typically you have, in our other case, we had a urban planning professor and his graduate students spent a week, in our community. They came out from Indiana. This was in Ohio. And at the beginning of the public meetings, they presented their findings exactly as you just described, to give a context for the likes and dislikes of people, so that they could see what was possible and what just wasn't going to fly. So, I think we're on the same page.
Yeah, I just want to make sure people don't think it's just going to be everybody who likes. Okay, yeah, yes. I think we would feel much more comfortable having an opportunity quantify some things before walking into that conversation.
Stu, I think that's a point that we needed to hear. Part of what's going on here is that I think when we started working, we always imagined the visioning, taking it to the public was gonna be at the end stage. But somewhere along the line, it got hijacked and pushed to the forefront of what everyone wanted to talk about, as you see, the big deal on this, our charge. So you pointed out correctly, and bring us back to our roots, that the first thing we need to do is to look and see what is even conceivable. Makes a lot of sense to me. The other thing, and I'm sure you've run into this a lot in your work, is that there's a sizable group of people within this community that think everything's just fine. And so they don't want to see any changes whatsoever. So just the thought of a change makes them nervous. And so, so that's also something that we need to be aware of and sensitive to, I believe, so.
Yeah, and that's not unique.
Yeah.
Every town is different, and in that sense, they're all alike. But there are changes that are occurring regardless if you want them or not in demographics and economics.
Can you speak about the pressures that all the towns, our size anyway, are suffering? We're not.
Experience.
Yeah, we're suffering. We're not unique in our.
Well, if I say something here, you're all gonna nod like, yeah, of course. But New Hampshire is extremely reliant on one source of revenue, property tax. There are classic, if you take taxation, there's wealth taxes, transaction taxes, and income taxes. New Hampshire has decided to only do one of those in any great amount, which is a wealth tax. If the wealth is owned predominantly by residents who vote, then most residents who vote want someone else to pay for that the best they can, including myself. So the push is always, well, how do we have non-residential, or certainly non-single-family residential pay for a higher percent? The counter to that is, well, what's that do to life quality, and what's it do to traffic, and all those things. And I know I shared with you, and certainly if anybody else wants to see it, we did some research for the city of Lebanon recently, where they had a group that was saying they had actually the flip side. Lebanon has one of the highest percentages of commercial to residential ratios in the state. It's 42, 43%. Lyme's about 4%. So it's pretty different, but their question was, well, is our tax rate going up because we have so much commercial that's causing it? Versus a question here might be, is it going up because there's so little? And to be a good bureaucrat, I said yes to both. It's true for both of them. And the reality is that, and let's not, we can talk about it, but municipal government budgets, and this is what I mean by throw school and towns together, not unreasonably are going up 1 to 4% on an average per year. Think about your household budget, that's not a big increase or something. And some of the factors are operational decisions that are made locally, teacher salaries, new roofs on buildings, those sort of things we have some control over. A lot of it's made by things you do not have control over. Environmental requirements for towns, for water, for septic, for the dumps. I mean, how many, remember the dumps used to be dumps, now they're much more, they're sealed, all kinds of things. So the operating costs, the push down. So it's not unreasonable to expect that municipal budgets are gonna go up 1 to 4% on average per year indefinitely. And you have one source to kind of stay up with that if you don't wanna have your tax rate go up, which is the development of wealth or development of taxable property. And the problem with that is if you do the math real quick, I'll do it for Lebanon because Lebanon has it's in the report, Lebanon has 40% of its tax base in non-residential commercial. For it to stay up with, so 40% to pay for the 100% increase, I'm saying, so in other words, if you want to pass it all into commercial and not have the residential pay, which is what we all want, they had to average every year at least $35 million of new commercial property on their tax base. And they've done that once or twice, you know, when some big thing comes on. It's just not a sustainable number. It's just, you can't do it. You take a town like Lyme, it's got 4%. For you to be catching up with 1 or 2 or 3% on a 4% is it's not gonna happen. So the question then is not, do we go nuts with commercial development because it'll bring our tax rate down? The reality is a rational process of quality improvement will keep it from going higher, but unless there is some change in the 1 or 2 or 3% a year, you're gonna be playing catch-up. So people I didn't believe that, to tell you the truth. Because one of our clients has been, the last 4 years, has been a town of Londonderry. And if you know where the Pettingill Road is, area where all the new, not warehouses, they're called logistics places now, that's a tax increment finance district we helped them put in place. They have now, they put $90 million on the tax base 2 consecutive years. They have $270 million of new non-residential tax base in that district. And Londonderry's tax rate went up. And now for different reasons. They needed, you know, they put an extra shift to the fire department on. The school put a fairly large bond thing through. The tax rate went up a lot less than it would have if they hadn't done the 277. And then we flipped to some other towns, looked at towns that had no commercial growth, and the tax rate increases was much worse. So I guess, but jumping ahead to conclusion, but I think the process of public leaders now is how do we balance off trying to keep the increases less without either throwing away why we're here or throwing away or degrading the services that makes this place special. I mean, the town has an expensive school budget, but it has a great school system. So, but until you kind of realize what those numbers are, I think it's hard to say, well, let's do one thing or another. But it's a quandary as long as the state has one source of funds. And I think the sooner you get your hands around it and understand what your options are, and also understand that, you know, the marketplace is not going to drive 5 big boxes here. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but it's probably not going to drive 1. You just don't have the traffic, you don't have the people, you don't have.
I don't think people want it here.
People don't want it here.
We certainly don't have the infrastructure for it.
And you don't have the population, you don't have the drive-through traffic, you don't have the sewer, you don't have the water, you don't have the fire protection. And if you've noticed a lot of.
Looking for a drive-through coffee shop.
Yeah, and so if you notice, a lot of big boxes are getting a lot smaller. So that's why I want to say, and I think to the degree that, Mr. Chairman, we can kind of help you with that. Here's some of those market things, here's what the revenues might look like. We're also going to look, when we talk about the place, we're going to look at the sites that are available, what kind of capacity is developable, you know, so if you have X number of acres, and your zoning allows for a certain amount of infill, what does that mean for square footage, what would that mean for tax base? And just, I hopefully get everybody on the same basis with information that if you want to challenge us, fine, but once everyone sees it, hopefully they can start on the same place.
What has been your experience using surveys? That's been discussed quite a lot.
Yeah, I think I mentioned there's different levels of surveys, and I guess I have a mixed feeling in the public sector for surveys because the simple ones are often filled out by the same people. So that's why I'm a little bit moving toward I mean, you can still do those, and I think things on the town survey site, website network. But I think there's some more interesting ways of getting feedback from people, things like charrettes and some other interactive discussions where people actually look at a specific thing and they say, I like this or don't like this about it, versus survey questions on community development issues are just hard to, you wanna see the village, the historic nature of the village maintained? I mean,
Everybody's gonna
who's
say
not
yes,
gonna say
right?
yes? So I think there's a lot of ways of getting smart, well-intended people to say things, other than just the monkey survey.
Mhm. Interesting. Any questions?
And I'm happy to answer questions later, and hope we can help you. If not, that's okay too.
I have a question. The first part, the opportunity assessment, that you're really just looking at facts on the ground. So the surveys are not part of that, or the survey is part of that?
The
So the
survey
opportunity-
would not, the first step would not be a survey.
Because you're going and looking at the tax records and you're
Yeah,
looking at the.
but we'd be
zoning,
looking at, if there have been past surveys, we'd certainly look at those. We'd certainly look at what the master plan says,
Right.
what, yeah. But,
The
only really,
surveys are more part of the visioning and getting,
I think it
public
comes
opinion
back,
for.
once we hand you that, then I think that you have the, let's just call it a discussion, and what are your thoughts?
You did, I read the Lebanon report carefully, you had 5 or 6 towns you compared to Lebanon,
yeah.
and you looked at Lyme, so you've already done some
Right.
level of work.
That's how I came up with those, I didn't make those up.
Yeah, okay, that's
Hopefully I
good.
didn't make those up.
John had a question.
So, yeah, I think, and this is getting back to something you said. A big part of the problem that, I'm from the planning board. We're currently working on the master plan. We're working on the housing chapter, we're doing rolling chapters. The select board authorized this group to do visioning. We're not gonna do a housing chapter without public feedback and visioning. So a lot of the problems here have been that this group was authorized to do the visioning precisely when the planning board is working on a master plan chapter. And that essentially set up this committee and the planning board for conflict. And I don't know why that was done, but the select board authorized that. So that's been a big problem for us, because what are we gonna do? Are we going to do our visioning in competition with this committee? I think that needs to be addressed.
And
You will recall, when we came to your meeting, I suggested that we wanted to help you accomplish that, and asked that you appoint a couple of people to work with a couple of our people, maybe a couple other ones.
Yes,
Have a small group and.
At that point, you were talking about a goal of $400,000 of development.
No,
Yes.
it wasn't,
No.
it wasn't a goal, it was just what.
I looked at the video.
Sue said that they were going to experience a $400,000
Yes,
shortfall, right?
yes.
And so we had this, what would it take to, how much, would it take to close that gap? It wasn't, nothing was decided.
There were, what we were told at that meeting was essentially, and I like what I hear from you, and I particularly liked that you need to get data and information beforehand. I really appreciate that, but what we were basically told is that this committee pretty much had selected you as the consultant. And frankly, I think the planning board takes precedence, since that's our our main statutory responsibility is to do visioning.
let me answer your question.
Please.
And I don't know if this is good news or bad news, but this is not unique, because there are 2 sets of statutes that say just what you just heard. And we're very familiar with the master plan statute, and we're doing hopefully we're doing another couple master plans for people. But there is also the RSA 162, which is the whole industrial development, community development stuff, which tells towns and cities to set up development organizations that are supposed to be looking at, and then some towns, these things do this, and sometimes they do this. But it is not unusual. In fact, the statute's kind of set up that potential conflict. And so one of the things I would really hope we can achieve collectively is to get those guys and get those two efforts in parallel and not head on, because they.
Yeah, it just seems really unfortunate that the timing of this precisely
Yeah, and-
when we were already in process.
Yeah, and then you've probably seen when you're doing your planning, things like the comprehensive economic development strategy, which is federally funded, there's a, which is done by the region, so, especially in a smaller community, sometimes the trick is trying to get those all to kind of say the same thing when they can. Obviously, there's gonna be some places where there's not gonna be agreement, some people are gonna want, it's worth the, we're working on a town right now that's along 3A, which is that major corridor runs on the interstate. It doesn't have a sewer line, it doesn't have water through about half of it, and there's a bunch of people who are saying that's crazy because it's really holding things back not to have sewer. And it's also environmentally not a very smart thing. And you have another part of the community who's saying, we don't want any more because it means 3A traffic goes up. So I guess the best I can offer to the planning board to this group is we'll put things in front of you and then encourage strongly that those outreach efforts are the same.
And when you are hired as a consultant, are you usually doing competing RFPs?
Yeah, most towns have their own buying thing. Sometimes if you have, sometimes they can do a sole source depending on the dollar amount, but we have no trouble with RFPs.
I mean, but generally, you're dealing with
We did
RFPs.
4 last week.
Yeah, yeah, so
And
that's,
we've also had some sole source, so.
yeah, but that's, I meant, it's, the usual process is
Yeah,
a bid.
and the positive of having a process is that it actually gives us more credibility to start the process. That we're not
Exactly.
seen as
Exactly,
that we were, tipped off ahead of time.
right.
Yeah, I have no trouble with an RFP. What I do have trouble, just, since we're talking about what our perceptions were at the others' meeting and so forth, you had a comment that, well, this should take 3 or 4 years when we were at your meeting.
Actually, that was not my comment.
No,
My
it was
comment was that
Amber's.
in the past, it had taken 3 or 4 years precisely because it was rushed.
I
at the
hear you,
beginning.
but my perception, having heard the frustrations of the selectmen when we began this process regarding the planning board and not moving forward, at least in the way they perceived it, was that, well, you're in full stall mode and nothing's going anywhere.
That is
That's-
so offensive.
Yeah.
It is just so offensive.
Well,
And the letter that we sent you was signed by the ex officio select board
I didn't say
member.
that was the.
And there's a select board member here
I
tonight who
didn't say
disagrees.
that was the fact, I said that was the perception.
That is offensive.
I'm not gonna apologize, that was
I know
my,
you're not.
that was my perception. Now, what I suggest though is that we hire a consultant such as Stuart, doesn't have to be, hello?
If you would like to make a call, please hang up and try again.
And then Chris
If
just
you
hung
need
up.
help,
Yeah.
hang.
Okay.
It's probably
So,
not
so I wanna
the-
clarify, you were told that the planning board was in full stall mode by the select board? Is that what you were told?
That was
Let's
my
not go
characterization.
Is that what you were told?
They expressed frustration. They
And who were
expressed
they?
frustration.
Who?
I'm gonna let one of
Me.
the expressors express herself. And I think that needs to be put on the table too. I mean, there was apparently, I'm new to all this. I didn't go to any of these meetings for 10 years. I hid out in my house. And when she put up the listserv, because I had experience in another community doing this, I volunteered. Go ahead.
I'm gonna take more questions, but.
Stuart, I
But
need
if you're
to
gonna
ask
get
you
to
a
where you're
question.
negotiating what not to do by RFP, I probably shouldn't even be in here, so. Let
Stuart.
me answer any substantive questions, and then I'm happy to help point you to somebody, or help you with the RFP process. Sir?
Stuart, I read the Lebanon report. And, Am I to believe that the synopsis was that it was inconclusive? That
I think we concluded pretty strongly, which,
You did?
yeah, I thought we did, yeah.
Okay, well, I guess it went, I guess,
The two major questions were the mixed-use developments causing the tax rate to go up? And I think pretty conclusively, we showed that the demand for services from new residents was no higher or lower than existing residents, that it was proportional.
yes,
And then
I saw
two
that.
was a high commercial tax base causing the tax rate to go up unusually. And we showed that the demand for commercial services were substantially lower than most commercial sites were paying. And so, the third thing we did is we looked at cities that had commercial development and those that didn't, all else being equal. And the ones that had more had a smaller increase than those that had less.
okay, well, when I read that, I came to the conclusion that there was no conclusion, really, in terms of giving relief to.
The solution, not conclusion. We came up with several conclusions.
Yes,
Yeah.
or solution.
Yeah,
I mean, you
solution
could
might be
look
a
at
different
it,
word, okay.
you could look at it either way. A solution comes from a conclusion.
We had to walk out of the room with our backs to the wall with the conclusions, but the solutions is something different, so.
Okay,
Um,
I'm just telling you,
yeah,
I read the damn thing and I'm going, oh, Jesus, you know.
I think I start off by saying if you are looking for tax reduction, not tax, if your rate's 5 today and you want to get to 4, I'm still looking for an example in New Hampshire where just property tax development actually lowered a rate. But I can show you every place that's done it has kept it from going higher. That's the reality with when you have a 1, 2, 3, 4% growth in spending every year.
So that's the conclusion.
Oh, do you ever look at spending issues? That's been part of the discussion.
I showed the spending, and I showed where it was coming from, how much was schools, how much was labor contracts. And all the data, by the way, comes from self-reported municipal information going to the Department of Revenue Administration. They run it through a blender that sort of takes out some of the variances. There's a whole coefficient thing that they do. As I mentioned also, if you talk to your town administrator or your public works or they're gonna tell you that, the rules that they used to run the water department are not what they're now doing. The health insurance and the.
Isn't the health insurance one of the
One of
major
them.
contributors?
One of 10.
Yeah,
I'll give you a good example, you don't have to worry about it. City of Portsmouth, if you go there today and you use the facilities of a restaurant, you send your discharge to the City of Portsmouth sewer treatment plant. And there it is. They're under an order by the federal government to replace that plant for $80 million to meet new federal standards.
I guess I'm not gonna move there.
$80 million. $80 million.
Where are we
And
gonna move?
who doesn't want the bay to be cleaner and all that, right? But I'm just saying, it's not adding anything to the community. It's not
No.
adding new playgrounds or anything. $80 million. If you ask Lebanon, they're now facing some serious upgrades of sewer treatment. Not as much of processing, but the piping, because there's new standards as far as infill leaking and some other things. So I know it's easy to say, well, and the schools are statewide, it's very easy to see it. The cost per students keep going up. And in the last 5, 6, 7 years, with most schools declining in enrollment or stable, much of it's come from capital expenditure. Educators, I think, correctly, how correctly are saying that the schools of yesterday physically are not the schools that work well for tomorrow. And so different classrooms, and we've did a little work just finished with Hopkinton. They have a great school system, but they've deferred maintenance for 12 years on some of their key buildings. I wish I could say, boy, if we just, but if the structure is what the structure is, and you rely on one tax, then that has to either grow equal to the spending, or your rate's gonna go up.
Stu, I think that, what would be most helpful for us as a committee is to identify, what the opportunities really are, because,
Yeah.
this committee has looked into it, but we're a volunteer committee, we're not professionals. And we have seen that we have some severe limitations within the town line. For example, we have 92% of our land that's either in current use or conservation, leaving 8% for anything else, for our tax base. We also have, we're a mountainous region, so we're limited to some land to be actually be built on.
Right.
We don't have water, we have poor internet and poor wireless. I think the most useful thing for us is to see just what are the possibilities out there. And by the way, within the first 2 or 3 of our meetings, our discussion was about how do we keep the increases down, not how to decrease the tax rate, because we all know that's not gonna happen, right? We're just trying to offset some of the increases that we see coming down the pike at us.
Right.
And that's all we're trying to do, is try to figure out ways, opportunities to do that. And
Right.
so I'm a little confused why anyone would be upset about that, but I guess it is what it is. So.
And we all know the reasons why. The obvious reason is that we all get to pay less, but the sort of bigger planning issues there is that it starts to squeeze your demographic profile tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter, so that you start losing the people in the earlier stages of economic and family formation, and start losing the families at later stages of.
Which is already happening here.
Yeah, and it's again, it's not an unusual thing, it's somewhat of a state phenomena, but it does not mean you shouldn't do everything you can to
Right.
mitigate it.
Well, one other issue that's been kicked around a lot is aging in place, elderly housing, and you have some expertise in that area.
Our shop does, we have a couple good zoning guys, it's not the zoning.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Any other questions? Stuart?
Yeah, I'd like to get your email so I can,
I'll leave a couple cards
Communicate.
if that's okay. Sure.
you know,
I think I will. Yeah, okay. Good to
So,
see you.
to continue,
Nils, if I may, while we're
Sure.
getting set up. It seems to me that if we're not careful, we're gonna spend more time protecting the turf rather than getting a job done. That's the first thing I see. And there are so many things that seem to come across our sites that aren't clarified. For example, if we wanna talk about current use and that sort of thing, I think it's pretty evident that that issue is fine. I mean, we enjoyed the trees and the deer paths and all that. The question is what it does to our taxes, not, and you know, I think sometimes we get so emotional about things that really aren't gonna help us, and you get emotional by thinking that we don't like the land is put aside for conservation isn't really the key issue. The key issue is it costs us money. So, which we can argue about that. But as far as listening to the planning board and what we're doing, it does seem as though we probably should do a little bit more of seeing how we can work together rather than trying to protect our turf, because that's what I see.
I willingly give up my turf, I got plenty of things to do, but you're exactly right, sir.
My perception is that the planning board and the LCDC really maybe aren't as far apart as we kind of think. And I would propose that we really have a meeting, a sit-down meeting between you guys and us, which we really, you know.
I thought that's what was happening tonight.
No,
For some
that
reason.
was planned, that was gonna be done, but apparently didn't work out.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, I know you guys already came to one of our meetings, but I just think it would be beneficial to sit there, because things have evolved, I mean, that was a while.
I think that is true, actually.
Yeah, and that letter to the planning board, that was a long time ago. I think
2 months
things-
ago.
Things have evolved since then.
Look, if the planning board is willing to, if my perception was wrong, offensive though it may have been, okay, I'm.
Yeah,
okay,
my perception
sure,
is your perception is wrong.
Okay,
But we should.
but let's put
try to-
personalities aside, and, you know.
No, I like your personality,
I'm
it's your perception.
I'm a goal guy, I wanna get a job done here. And I had felt, apparently wrongly, that you were going too slowly, okay?
Well,
And-
I think that's
and
something
then-
we, I
and
think,
the 3 to 4 year comment was
that 3
icing
to 4 year
on
comment
the
has
cake to
been
me.
taken,
So if my perception was wrong,
it's
let's
completely wrong.
hold hands
But-
and jump in the pool together.
You wanted to say something.
Yeah,
for a
I'm
while.
just, I guess, I get, you know, so I'm a planning board alternate.
Yeah.
And, so as a planning board member, I don't see my job as one that tries to find solutions to our tax issues. I see our job as, analyzing development that comes to the table. So I feel like we as two groups have really different jobs or charges
Yeah,
that should complement one another. The only thing that seems to be holding us up is the fact that we have one of our charges is also the master plan. And the master plan
And we don't
is-
disagree with that, we know
Right,
that.
Right, but the master plan is many more chapters than just housing and, economic development. So it is reasonable that if you're doing it chapter by chapter, that the, master plan, should take 3 years to revise.
the whole master.
The whole master plan. I don't
No,
mean
who-
one
who-
chapter. So, I think the problem is still where this visioning and the surveying takes place. So maybe it will become a non-issue. I think that what Stuart was saying tonight, the gathering of information is critical. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what we want in a master plan. That's what we want to know for our community. So I think,
Part of the information, though, is the opinions of the community once it is informed.
absolutely.
But
that's
what
why
he
the
was,
facts have
what he
to
was
be-
saying, which I agree with 100%, is before getting opinions,
Yeah.
you have to have data and you have to inform the people.
I think we can say that was always our intent as.
Well, but one,
as
and
our
this
committee.
is, even if we do work together, this is where I think we have a potential problem from what you've been saying consistently. And consistent with what Mike Smith has been saying repeatedly, is if you rush the process, and I'm not talking about 3 or 4 years, but if you rush the process, if you, and even what Stuart said tonight, that in a way he would prefer RFPs because he would have more credibility. I think you're making a mistake if you are rushing it and avoiding going through, it's a really unpleasant process, frankly, you know, to go through all those steps. Yeah, it would be great if we could just pick our own consultant and get the thing moving, but it's a necessary step in terms of, and Mike Smith has been saying this over and over again, and I can't agree more. You need to have buy-in, and you have buy-in by having a transparent process, by having what Stuart was saying, which I really like, which is you get the data, you get the information, you're prepared with your charrettes if you're gonna do charrettes, because it's based on something. But if you're not gonna do RFPs and you're not gonna have a steering committee, and I don't, you know, that's whatever, you said you were gonna have a steering committee, people showed up, and now you're not having a steering committee. I think you're making major mistakes.
Too many people.
Yeah, I'm
So-
fine, no, I understand that, but I think you're making major mistakes by pre-selecting or having a very,
You understand, I don't know him from a hill of beans.
but
He
you've been
was-
very
he was-
outspoken that
he-
but
He
you've
was
been-
suggested by two of them, I think, Ann Duncan, the Grafton
I
County guy,
understand.
and Steve Schneider from the regional planning.
I was very impressed with him tonight. That's not what I'm talking about. Even he said that he'd be better off going through an RFP process.
Is the town of Lyme gonna pay for $15,000? For,
Not this year.
that's,
And I also note that H in our charge, submit a final report with recommendations to the select board, to the select board by January 31st, 2019, which is basically what 9 months.
Well, that's.
And I think that's a reasonable amount of time
That
to,
could, I don't know.
to accomplish what this committee has been charged to accomplish. And so,
But
as
it's
far as
your
I'm
goal.
concerned, the visioning process was always about getting buy-in from the town, getting people involved, understanding, what they are looking for. And it was always planned to be at the very end, so if we just turn over a report and don't do the visioning process, that's not gonna bother me personally. Let you guys do the visioning, we're giving them some data, is all we're trying to do. And that's really been our charge from the very beginning. We obviously all have personal opinions about where we think this thing
I mean,
should go.
if the planning board could agree to a schedule that was reasonable, that wasn't vague and just, maybe when we get the third chapter, we'll get around to it, okay?
It's not remotely what-
All right, but if you can agree to some reasonable, say we get it done by the end of the summer,
So why
Well, I
don't,
then
I don't
maybe
see where
we'll-
we're doing the same thing. I think we're doing something different. I think you're
well,
correct. We're doing
we
something
both
different.
need the same data is the thing, and at least we need the same data, and we need the same opinion sampling of the community.
so why don't we schedule a meeting and see if we can really nail it down?
I'm not against that, are you?
Nope.
But again,
But if you don't.
we need to move forward,
If we can't
and
agree,
we are gonna
then,
move
then,
forward,
then
so.
you go, as Bob Dylan said, you go your way and I'll go mine.
But that would seem silly to do that,
Of
because we
course.
gotta get the same
Of course.
stuff now.
It would, but I think that goes to John's point about not rushing, and that's important. I think it's important for you guys to get the charge is still in flux. I personally don't even know what exactly you're visioning for, and what is the end result of the visioning process. So there's something floating out there, I don't really even know what it is. So, and this is not as a planning board member, but charging ahead before you have those things settled and before the public is aware of those things, I think is dangerous.
Well, it's to develop paths to revenue is what your charge is, isn't it?
Yep.
The town.
That is what our charge is.
To bring the taxes down.
So why, again, this is a repeated theme. Why is it needs to be net revenue. It's not just revenue. Because revenue.
That's fine, that
net-
should be there.
It should be, it has to be net revenue.
Absolutely.
Stuart he was talking about some of those things tonight.
But that's in your charge, it just says revenue, it has to say net revenue.
That's an easy fix.
And your charge is changing, to Eric's point, your charge changes so often that people who are reading it don't know what you're doing. How many times has the charge changed? Because I can't keep track.
Yeah, the net revenue is just an estimate, it's just a guess.
Right, of everything.
And so, yes, that's why we wanted to get the expert, that's why we wanted to get the data,
Yeah.
so that we can have professional guess as opposed to amateur guesses going on here. So
I think we agree about the net revenue, but it should be in there. It's not revenue, it's net revenue. Because revenue isn't gonna tell you what the tax impact is gonna be, that's the net revenue. And if we have an expert, they'll do a better job than any of us will do.
Why don't you propose something, and then we'll know it's acceptable to you?
Propose something about what?
Propose something about a process, meaning by the end of the summer, for instance.
No, it's not.
Too long?
Yeah, no.
Go ahead. Speak into the mic, Sue.
I think the first thing, you're right, we need to get the charge squared away and make that official. So that's the first thing. And then let's set up this meeting and get together and talk this out.
Right.
Okay. Tomorrow isn't gonna work because we have a hearing, but we can do it on the next meeting. What's that? And yeah, you have to get your charge anyway. So, I suppose in 2 weeks.
Probably won't be here.
Today is what is it today? The 11th?
Maybe the 20.
The 12th and then
26th.
26th. And I'm sure Stuart's, I've drawn all over it, but you can get your own copy. I think it'd be instructive to, it's on the Office of Strategic Initiatives on the New Hampshire, it's a New Hampshire office. And they supply information for planners and people who are interested in this sort of stuff. And they give a sample request for proposals, and I'm sure he'll be familiar with it because it's the town of Londonderry. And I think it'd just be instructive for you to read through the sample.
I did go through some, and I'm trying to remember, Phil Barta, right? Phil Barta? Worked on it with me, and I thought we came up with something that fit. I'm not opposed to using that. It was always the timing of that and the fact that some of the committee members here were getting pretty impatient that we weren't moving forward fast enough. And those very same people were the ones who had gone out into the community and raised the money to finance all of this. If the town is saying that, you know, the town is not gonna fund, then we gotta go get private funds, which we have commitments for. But those folks wanna see something happen, and they don't wanna have this thing to drag on.
Well, I
forever.
mean, look, I think, well, I'll speak for myself. I think it would be great the faster we can go. But I don't think we do that at the expense of having it work and having buy-in. And when people donate money for visioning, they're donating the money for visioning. They can't guide the process once that money is given over.
Nobody's
Okay,
tried to.
so then it's not up to them. It's up to those who are doing the visioning to do the best job they can do and have the biggest buy-in they can get.
I just would gently caution that if this becomes too bureaucratic and then it's my impression we'll lose that source of funding if we bog down in a bunch of
Well, then
meetings.
let's see how well we can do, and how efficiently we can do it.
That makes sense.
Okay.
I had a question. If it's that important for these two groups get together, why, are you looking at a planning board date that you normally use, or are you gonna have a special meeting?
I was looking at a normal date.
Why wouldn't we just,
We could
if
try.
if it's that important, why don't we get together ASAP?
We can do that, if you can get all these people at the same time. I would do it.
I'm thinking these people are easier to get, are reasonable to get together, because we've been trying to get this thing done. We wanna meet next week instead of next month, fine.
I would do it.
Well, there you go.
Headed to
That's spring
Ohio in
break.
the morning so I can pay
Spring
my
break,
bills.
so.
So, well, how many people have flexible schedules here?
Well, fairly flexible.
Mine is fairly flexible.
Fairly.
How many people don't?
But I've been brought in a couple
Yeah,
times.
you were here last time, so, I'm open to having a special meeting.
Okay. Who's gonna coordinate that? Sue, from our group?
When are you back in town?
I don't know yet.
We have to get David in.
I get-
I think it'd be nice to have our
Interesting.
chair
Parties
at
don't.
that meeting.
I'll be back for the
It's
next
all
2
open
weeks,
meeting.
but I don't know the date
It's open to the public.
exactly.
Why don't you get
Does
the
that
day,
say
we'll
TRC?
schedule
I'll
it
call
the
Sue.
day or the day after you get back.
I'm sorry, what?
Two X's.
I have court hearings back in Ohio and I
Yeah.
can't
So
control.
we're just,
So I think that I will be back in about a week to 10 days, if that would suit
That's
people.
fine with me. I'm open to pretty much any time. If that day I happen not to be doing something.
Let's try to do that, because I think it'd be nice to have our chairperson at that meeting.
Of course. So,
Maybe we should think about the 26th.
She's gonna get a hold of Sue, and she'll get a hold
so,
of you.
but if we're talking about 10 days, is that what you're saying?
A week or 10 days, I'm not sure.
You thought you'd be here the 25th?
I'll be back 2 more times by the end of the month, but I didn't bring my calendar with me.
So you can get hold of Sue and.
I'll call Sue.
Yeah.
I think that would,
Is our
And I'm
next-
leaving on Friday, but I'll be
Our next
back.
meeting is scheduled for the 25th, so that would work as well.
What?
Word.
Mr. Chair,
Sir?
may I?
Yeah?
I actually came to the meeting tonight for one purpose. So I just recently went to the NHMA Association's local officials workshop. So since I was only in a position for 3 weeks, it was an eye opener for me. Lots of learning. And Sue recognizes that I've struggled with RSA 91A. And that I'm just like, how do you ever get any work done if you can't have emails go back and forth, if you can't do this, if you can't get together? And it was driving me bonkers. But after I came through the workshop, I now know why. And so tonight, really, I came here tonight really to share with you and actually encourage someone on your committee, probably should be the chair. And you'll probably catch on to these things faster than I did since they're all laws. But you know, the right to know law starts off with that the Constitution and government says that it should be open. Just the very early stages, they said a long time ago, should be open. And so the purpose of 91A is to ensure both the greatest possible public access to the actions, discussions, and records of all public bodies and their accountability to the people. So with that, we just have to make sure that we read and acknowledge what's inside of here. And unfortunately, in the last few weeks, it's come to my attention that the committee, which is a subcommittee of the select board, hasn't been following it. And we need to be so careful here. And I'm just here to ask and press and tell that this committee must follow RSA 91A. It's that clear to me, just like the select board does, just like the planning board does, just like all the other boards and committees do. And so you can't have sequential emails where you start to work the emails. You just can't do it. As much as we could do, as much as you could.
Excuse me. Sequential emails where you begin to work the email, what does that mean?
Okay, so a good example would be the email where, and I forget the lady that was back here last time, Sue, I think asked her to create a wording for the RFP. And that got submitted to the chair, and I think actually maybe they've been kind of circulated a little bit, but then it finally circulated amongst the whole committee, CCing the select board, and quite frankly, from there on in, it started sort of gaining traction, if you will, with people responding, yeah, I like that. I think Neil's went and built more onto it. Some people came back and said, yeah, I'm with you, that makes sense to me. Yeah, I like that one too. So those types of emails, you're basically working the solution in a non-public setting. So for all intents and purposes, like tonight, you know, if you were to leave this meeting and say, okay, so David, your task is to, you know, get with, you know, Sue and put together the agenda for the next meeting. So then you go out, you write that agenda, you can send it electronically to Sue, and that's about it. You show up at the next meeting, just like this, you know, we got the draft for your LCDC. And so I'm able to get the draft, I'm able to send it back to Dina so we're ready for tomorrow, but we can't discuss it, work it until we've got a quorum and we've got the public body and it's on the agenda. And so there's all these formats that you have to go through to marry up to 91A. So I tried to get the slides that they presented to me, and I wanted to share those with you. I've written all over mine. But you've got to do everything basically in this type of setting for all intents and purposes.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, the emails are the issue, because I'm looking at a camera right there, and this is a public meeting, so we're doing everything else.
Yeah,
Like
you're-
we're putting this up in the public.
Yeah.
Anyone's invited, so the only thing that I can see that can possibly be considered non-public would be that one email set that, where there was some work actually done from one member to another.
Right.
So all we have to do is be careful about the emails, which is considered a private, not a public situation.
Well, I think you have to be careful with everything that's inside of here, that's just one example.
It
What
could
would be other
Could
examples?
be
Could be-
telephone calls.
Okay.
phone calls where you
You can
meet
have a
away from the
conference,
house
you can have a
and three of you
conference.
talk about it without noticing.
You can talk, you can't deliberate. You can't deliberate.
Gotcha.
Right.
It's-
And I think, Kevin, because when I started on this committee, I said, it's like, what are my obligations here? Because I know it's not
Right.
easy, loosey-goosey. I think it's very clear, you can send a note that says, I'm thinking about this, I'd like to talk about it the next time. Absolutely, and that gets on the agenda, and
Yes.
everybody's, you
Yep.
can send that to the group, and everybody can say, huh.
And they can walk in thinking about it.
And they can walk
they're-
in prepared to argue about it, and that's cool,
Sure.
that's absolutely okay.
Yes.
It's the
Act-
working it and evolving it. That's a question I don't know. Can two people, in a group where the quorum is 4 people or 5 people, can 2 people go and hammer something out to bring a proposal to the big group?
Right. Yeah, so I think the answer is yes. Sue, correct me if I'm wrong, because you gotta have a quorum to basically be working, so,
You can work drafts.
Yeah,
Okay.
but the problem, so what I'm,
For you
What-
guys, as
so-
a select board,
We-
you can't.
so in my new position now, it's
Yeah.
like, you just can't, because there's just, once you get 2, then that's a
Yeah,
quorum.
right.
And so that's why I stalled for a second, because I'm always thinking about how I am in my position.
Thank
So,
you.
Okay, but that's why I came tonight, because I felt
Thank you.
strongly after I went to the training on Monday, it's like, I need to talk to these guys, because before anything comes of it, if you will.
Thank you.
Motion
I
to
didn't
adjourn.
necessarily, I didn't necessarily mean to mix with everyone in the back.
Sure you do.
Of course, you just violated the open meeting rule, because there's 2, you got a quorum here,
No,
right?
actually,
They didn't
No, this
They didn't- they didn't
this is
talk
in
to
the
each other.
public. This is in the public.
So it's in the public, so that's the only, and I'm not at the table.
Anybody have anything else for the good of the order?
I make a motion, we adjourn.
I second that.
So moved. In favor.
Do we keep our cards?
Signed, but don't take them home.
Don't take them home.
Okay.
So, just, you're adjourned, but who's contacting who about this?
I'm gonna tell her when I know my schedule, and then she'll call you.
She'll call me? Okay.